wherever you are listening to another episode of the Toolshed podcast. And in this podcast, I've got a very special guest. He doesn't know this, but I was just over near where he lives on the weekend, but probably a little bit too far. We're over in Western Australia for a couple of days, and that's where we're beaming our next guest in from. But the topic of this conversation is, are sales skills really important for tradies? Like, how important are sales skills for tradies? Now, I have my own opinions, which will probably be aired through this discussion because I think they are extremely important. And I'm pretty excited to be able to speak with our special guest. His name is John Blake. He's coming all the way from Western Australia, and I've known John for a long, long time, and he is world class as far as teaching and communicating the value of the sales process and sales skills. So I'm hoping that we're going to learn an absolute truckload in this conversation that's going to be super valuable. So welcome to the Toolshed, Mr. Blake. How art thou?
Mate, I'm good. Good to catch up again.
Yes,
Been a while.
we were that close. We were on a ferry in the Swan River and went past the Fremantle Museum, the Maritime Museum.
Mm-hmm.
But you're a little bit further away than that, aren't you? Where are you? You're
Margaret
River, or
I lived in Margaret River for a while, but I'm in Perth now.
Oh, we could have seen you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's fly right into this, because it's in my view anyway, and we've known each other for a long time now, and the focus that we have, we're with builders and trades-based businesses, and my view is that sales skills are probably the least focused upon in the building business, yet they are, to me, one of the most important skills, from the perspective that every time we have a conversation with a difference of opinion, whether it's with a team member, with a supplier, with a subcontractor, with a client, with a prospect, it's a sales conversation. So having the understanding of that, the quality of communication that's necessary for good sales, and one of the things I want you to clear up is, over the years, sometimes sales gets a bad rep, and it shouldn't, because it's one of the most valuable skills that can really make or break a business. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a stack of thoughts on that.
Off you go.
I mean, I guess the first one is, we are currently in a world where tradies are in pretty healthy demand. So there's lots of people who in trades-based businesses are busy. There's lots of inquiry, and this is, I think this is typical if you are either if you're business to consumer or if you're business to business. And so there's a certain school of thought that might think, well, the last thing I need to do is get better at selling, because I can't keep up with the work that I've already got. Mm. And my answer to that is, well, in really buoyant times, where people, where there really is a steady path to your front door, and there's lots of people that are wanting to work with you, sales skills are just as important, because we actually need to be able to disqualify people that aren't a fit. So often there's an opportunity cost in going and talking to someone who would have been better referred to the local newspaper. Yeah. So we tend to put a guy in a van and send him out to see somebody, even though the opportunity is probably less than ideal. So one of my clients does window treatments, and they went through a stage where, and this is dynamic, right? So we need to have an approach for both scenarios.
Yeah.
So they went through a period where things were ridiculously quiet because they were transitioning from one digital agency to the new one, and the new one was just not kicking goals at all. Like, and it, the leads and the inquiry had just dwindled down to a trickle. And so people would ring up and it didn't really matter. It was like, wow, the phone rang. We just need to get somebody out there because they were the only opportunities that we had.
Yeah.
And so then they changed digital agencies and they got a new one, and the new one was really good. So they went from having very few having very few inquiries, per week and per month, to having between 50 and 80 inquiries for people that wanted a home visit. And people don't, they're not professional buyers of your particular product or service, that they just expect that someone's going to come out and give them a measure and quote. So this coincided with them only they went from a sales force of 5 people with very little leads coming through to a sales force of 2 people with between 50 and 80 leads coming through per week.
With their
And
tongue
and
hanging
e-
out.
and each, and each one of those salespeople, each one of those individual salespeople, could only service 16 appointments per week because they had one office day. So they had an appointment capacity per week of 32 between them, yet they had between 50 and 80 inquiries. So suddenly we went from having a pretty loose funnel, where we would go out and talk to anyone that could fog up a mirror, to this situation where it's like, come on, like, and I was listening to the appointments, because I've got access to the calls, and they were making appointments before they'd even asked the person where they lived, whether it was a rental, what sort of windows they had, and some people want some, they're asking, ringing up, and I just want to get some aluminium Venetians for the dunny. And they're putting somebody in a van and sending them out there. And so I use that example as a way to underline the importance of having systems in your business. And it might not necessarily, everyone thinks, sales, it's, we're converting, we're selling, we're converting inquiries into leads, but it's the way that leads are managed. And at certain times it might be more of a disqualification process than a qualification process, because each trades business only has a certain amount of capacity. And in most cases, what I think all trades business owners would agree is that you want to fill that capacity up with quality work.
Yeah.
And unless
Quality
you've actually
people
got a
too.
process at the front end for somebody, so the person that answers that initial call, they are crucial to the business, because the way that they handle that call, in addition to having a nice way to say no, because we live in this world where if we decide that we're not going to go out and visit somebody on site, or that their particular project would be better served by a different approach, we need a nice way to say no, because we live in this world where someone who never spent a cracker with you can go online and give you a 1-star review, knowing nothing about your business, not having spent a cracker with your business. If they felt like they weren't dealt with or heard or listened to, they're just as likely to go online and give you a 1-star review, and that can be an absolute nightmare. So it's having the language frameworks in place at every stage of the process, from the moment that somebody inquires with you, whether it's via email or whether it's via an initial telephone call, an incoming telephone call, or via social media, if they're messaging you through LinkedIn or through Facebook or whatever. It's about having a communication framework that takes somebody through your process to a point where you actually qualify them and they become a client, or to where you disqualify them and you refer them to another place that would be more appropriate for their particular set of circumstances.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying. It's in Builder's Business Black Belt, or in Blueprint, which is our sort of entry level program, 16-week program.
Yep.
One of the three things that we talk about is this qualification. We call it the quality client pathway, but it's exactly what you were talking about, and I just love what you're saying. And it's and one of the beautiful things that I've learned over the years that if you've got a really good qualification process where you're fundamentally putting a behavioural hurdle in front of your prospect. And it's a behavioural hurdle that you have created because you understand the mentality and the makeup of the person that you're not looking for. So obviously, in marketing, people are always identifying their ideal prospect avatar and all that sort of stuff. But what about the one that you don't want? Like really understanding their makeup and their triggers and all that sort of stuff. And if you put a little behavioural hurdle in front of them and say, okay, to get to the next step, I just need you to do this. We don't have to say no. We can. They just won't. That person won't jump over the hurdle. So
Yeah.
But it's. I think also what you're saying that is super valuable, because, and I'm sure people have come to you and they think the key to their business is getting more leads.
Yeah.
But they put them in this bucket or black hole or whatever, and they're just wasting their time, their money, and their effort on those leads because they don't have a process to nurture them and educate
it's
them.
insane. It's insane. I was working with this guy who did sheds, and he was. I think it was like maybe, I want to say, 8 to 9 grand a month.
Yeah.
On lead gen.
Yeah.
And his team were just not following any of them up. So they were just pumping quotes out and they weren't following any of them up. And then because they had so much incoming inquiry, they didn't have the bandwidth to follow anyone up. You know what I mean? Like they just literally didn't have the time because there was so much incoming inquiry. They just didn't have, they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I said to him, you could halve your ad spend and make your business so much more profitable, and we could convert more because and I showed him all the data about how leads are handled and how often they're neglected, especially in trades businesses are notoriously bad for following up with people that they've made an offer to, and that person hasn't converted. And he just couldn't. It was just too far out of his comfort zone. He just couldn't do it. He just wouldn't let go. He just had to keep.
So what was the
burying
solution?
himself with leads.
So nothing changed.
No, I had to let him go. It was like mate, like this is the opportunity, and you can carve another $5 grand worth of profit out of your monthly overhead, and you'll make exactly the same amount of sales. And he was so afraid of losing his position in the market because and admittedly it's a very competitive space, like sheds. It's really competitive, but he was scared that if he pulled back, he would lose his position on the front page of Google, because he had this paid space that that he continued to invest in for a long time. But he just couldn't flick the switch. He couldn't pull the lever on it.
And effectively, had he taken your advice, he would have saved the money on the ad spend.
Yeah.
But then it doubled the bandwidth to be able to follow up and communicate and find the good quality people in the leads that were generated, and
Yeah.
probably end up with more sales at a more profitable level. I mean, it's just craziness. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and it's, it's interesting for someone like me to be talking about a project that didn't work, but I think it illustrates the point really well.
Mm,
It's like if you're not prepared to actually look at, and I look at, there's like 7 leverage points that I look at within any what I call it, like a lead ecosystem. So it's like, where does it come in, and then how do we manage that lead throughout the process, all the way through to resell, upsell, and retain. And upsell might be, referral. Resell might be, the next project. And there's a whole bunch of different levers that you can pull all the way through. But unless people are prepared to make some of these tweaks, it will mean that they will probably never optimize what they're doing.
mm. Yeah.
you know,
And you see it every day in trades-based businesses, which is why I was
yeah,
excited to have this conversation with you, because, I hope it rattles a few cages. I hope it sort of wakes a few people up to go, I'm really, really busy and I'm not making the money that I'd like to have, and I don't have the time that I'd like to have. I think you've probably just given them the answer, in the first 15 minutes of our conversation.
yeah, yeah,
It's because you haven't got a process, and like, we are going to talk about sales skills, but
yeah,
what you're really talking about is a process to deal with, like, how do I nurture, how do I communicate, what are the steps I need to take that person through to number one, find out whether they're legitimate somewhere early in the process, and then get them to make a decision somewhere later in the process to get them across the line, rather than, here's your quote, give us a call back if you want me to build your shed.
yeah,
Like, it's just it's
yeah,
crazy. So let's assume now that everybody has gone, wow, John Blake, amazing. Let's assume that they go, and they're going to put in place a process, some steps. What are the next things that you start to talk about with your clients? Like, once you've got a process implemented, what
Yep.
are some of the skills? Is it language? Is it body language? Is it energy? I don't know. I'm just pulling ideas out of the air here. What are some of the things that you teach your clients to really turbocharge the process that they've put in
Yeah.
place?
Well, the first thing that we do is we map their process.
Yeah.
So the first thing I'll say is, okay, well, tell me what happens when you get an inquiry. Does somebody ring you? Do they email you? Like, how does that lead come in?
Yeah.
And then we talk about, okay, well, how quickly do you get back? How many? What percentage of those leads get contacted? Like, how many do we actually talk to? So, as an example, another guy that does water tanks, so similar to the shed guy,
Mm.
was chatting to him, and I said, I said, let's just look at your web leads, and he said, well, we get 200 web leads a month, and I said, okay, great. I said, what's your conversion rate there? And he said, oh, it's 25%, and I said, oh, okay, so you're converting 50
Yeah.
of them. And he said, actually, no, we convert 25 of them. And I said, well, I
So
said, I'm not real good
did he
at
fail
math.
maths at school?
Yeah, like I'm not real good at maths, but I'm pretty sure that 25% of 200 is 50.
Hmm.
And he said, oh, nah, it's because we only actually contact half of them.
Wow.
And I said, well, what happens to the other 100 each month? And he said, oh, they just get put on a database, and we send them an EDM, once a month.
Yeah.
And I said, is that it? Just, is that all they get? And he said, yeah. And so there's a leverage point right there. Like the ones that,
What were they talking to you about? Like, why did they get you in if they've got 200 leads and they're making 25 sales a month?
yeah,
and they're leaving 100 leads on the table, what did they want you to do? What did they think was the problem?
Well, the problem was clearly that they didn't think that they had a problem, but the problem was clearly that they didn't have a strategy to continue to. So I think they were only attempting to contact each of those inquiries maybe a couple of times,
Yeah.
like 2 times before they gave up, and they were only ringing them. So they weren't using SMS or email or any of that stuff. So a combination of all of those different contacts medium uh, can help you to get a lot more out of those leads. Will you contact all of them? No, you won't, because that's just the way that lead gen is. But you can, if you can every month, instead of only contacting 100, you can contact 120 or 130.
Hmm.
That's going to make a big difference to your
Yeah.
profitability than only talking to half of them. So, and that's just one of the 7 areas that we look at.
Yeah.
So we look at, okay, so how do we treat the lead when it first comes in? What's the actual framework for that initial call? So are we, depending on the offer, depending on how the company's positioned in the market, do we need to disqualify? Are we going to be disqualifying harder, or are we going to be qualifying? It's what are we looking to do there? In most cases, we're disqualifying at that point more than actually,
Hmm.
uh, qualifying. The next step is, and this is a massive opportunity, is once they've done that, they've actually gone and visited somebody, or they've taken them through that front end needs analysis, and they've gone on site and they've measured up. A massive disconnect is people will just email the quote and they won't actually follow up, or they email the quote and why I have this saying where I say that in that situation you are never more powerful in the 2 seconds that elapses before you press send on that email,
Yeah.
because they're probably talking to 2 or 3 other people, and now that they've got your piece of paper, they can now go and shop you around.
Hmm.
So, so one of the massive shifts that we find is having a framework and making a time to actually present that quote to the person.
Yeah.
So we actually have a process for actually doing that, to actually make a time with the person to actually go through it with them, rather than just hitting send and sort of crossing your fingers and
Yeah.
hoping for the best. So there's about 10 strategic advantages that
Hmm.
you can get from presenting a quote to someone as opposed to just emailing it.
What sort
Um,
of pushback do you get on that? I'm just sort of, I had a very similar conversation with people, and I can kind of hear their responses. But what sort of pushback do you get? What are the common responses when you
from
say,
clients?
"Dude," yeah, from a client when you
Yeah, yeah,
say, "We've got to get face to face and present this," or
yeah.
something better than pressing the send button and seeing what happens?
Well, I have three. I have good, better, best. So good is if the person's incredibly difficult to get a hold of, one of the best things that you can do is to just call them and say, so this is the worst case scenario.
Hmm.
Worst thing you can do is ring the person and just say, look, I've gone back, I've put together your outline. It's got everything that we talked about. It's got the this and just a broad brushstroke over the thing.
Call me.
And no. This is, you're actually having the conversation with them on the phone.
Oh, okay. I thought they
Yeah.
were hard to get a hold of.
Well, if best thing you can do is to get them on the phone
Yeah, yeah,
and just give them a verbal. So look, I'm just about to send it through. It includes this, and this, and it's actually come out a little bit lower than what I thought. I think I told you that it was going to be around X amount, but it's come in a little bit under that, and I'm just going to send it through now. When we get a chance to have a look at that, and the person says, "Oh, look, I'll have a look at it tonight." And you go, "Okay, cool. So when did you want to chat about this again?" And I'll say,
mm,
"Oh, can you give us until the end of the week?" And you go, "Okay, cool. Look, I'll put a note here to give you a call on Friday. What does your diary look like Friday morning? Just so that we don't play phone chasey. It'll be in my diary. I won't forget it. It'll be in yours.
yeah,
The chat will only be for 10 minutes. It'll just give us an opportunity to check in and make sure that we're on the right page.
Yeah.
And then that's sort of like the worst case scenario. The next one is the next one up. So if that was good, the next one's like better. Better would be presenting it to them on Zoom.
Yep.
Or presenting it to them over the phone with them opening it.
Yeah. While you're there.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the third one, and this is for the bigger ones, like, so if you've got something that represents an 80-20 type order, so like if your average transaction size is like 50 grand and this one was like, 200, then yeah, you want to print that thing out in hard copy and go and get in front of them and present it to them,
Yeah. And from a building business, I mean, it doesn't take much to get into, $500,000, $1 million for, a new build, that sort of stuff. And potentially 30 to 50 hours has gone into the presentation or the proposal, and then you're going to email it to them.
Yeah. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. Can go in the spam, can get ignored, can easily get shopped around.
Yeah.
But so people push back, and I give them the good, better, best. And then the other thing that I push that I say when people push back on it is I say, so tell me how many times this has happened. You went out, and let's just say that you were one of the first people that spoke to them, and you put together an outline that had this particular spec, right? And then what you find out when you or what you find out is that in between them seeing you and perhaps seeing option number 2, option number 3, and option number 4, they change their mind on the spec. So what you actually emailed through to them wasn't something that they were then able to compare apples to apples with.
Yep.
So so they might have decided that they didn't want to go ahead on something, but your fee still reflected that initial spec, whereas option 2 and option 3 and option 4 didn't have that in it. Now, if you present it to somebody, as you're going through, they can go, oh yeah, no, we've decided that we don't want that anymore. And so rather than being in a situation where you've already emailed it, you can say, all right, well, look, let me reconfigure, and I'll come back to you. So you can actually change the scope. You can calibrate where you are with the person so that you're actually not presenting something that was consistent with what they thought they wanted 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. I mean, so important.
And often when I say that, when they push back and go, "Oh no, people just, people are busy. I'm just going to email." Often when they push back on it and I give them that scenario, they're like, "Oh, that happens a lot."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Yeah, that's a really good point." So and that's just one of the strategic advantages that you get from actually presenting the thing in person. Not the least of which is you actually get an opportunity to ask for the business.
Yes. Yeah.
Or at least confirm when the next conversation is going to take place. And I always say to people, make a time, because they're going to be flat out.
To never ever leave a conversation and trades-based businesses are renowned for this.
Yeah.
I'll give you a call next week. Or give us a call when you're ready, or things like that. How important is it to have, let's call it the next move, whatever the next move might be, locked in at this stage? Yeah,
it's just crucial, because in the absence of that, you are automatically in chase mode. And it's phone tag, and if you're busy and if they're busy, which most people are, and add to that the fact that 70% of telephone calls go unanswered.
Yeah.
Right. And so people, if you just ring someone randomly, you're more than likely not going to get them than get them. So, but if you people live their lives by their digital calendars. If you send somebody a 5 or a 10-minute calendar invite, it's actually a micro commitment. So someone
Yep.
clicks on that accept, it's a
Yep.
micro commitment.
Yes.
Plus there was the verbal commitment that
Equivalent.
they made before you sent the calendar invite. So that's 2 micro commitments
Yeah.
that they've now made. You are so much more likely to get them on the phone because it appears in their calendar.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
those little things. So that's the present the quote part, and then there's the follow up part, and there's effectively 2 frameworks. There's the first 90 days, and then there's between 90 days and the 18-month mark. And what we know is that there's actually from the moment that somebody inquires about something, about 50% of people will buy within the first 18 months, but only on average between 15 and 20% of people will buy in the first 90 days. So there's actually
Mm.
more people who are going to buy from someone
Yep.
between
Eventually.
eventually in between the 90-day mark and the 18-month mark
Yeah.
than what they will between the initial point of contact and the 90-day mark.
Yeah.
And most businesses think that the long game of follow-up is 90 days.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And how many
So,
people, how many businesses, and it's just a little pet peeve of mine.
yeah.
If I'm calling, it didn't have to be a trades-based businesses, but they're classic for it.
Yeah.
And you're saying you want this, I'd like to buy this, or I'd like to get a price for this, or come and have a look at this, or what have you. And I cannot tell you how many phone calls I've had where they haven't asked my name, they haven't
No.
got my phone number off me, they haven't got an address, they haven't done anything. It's like, how do I get onto their database so they can nurture me and I become one of those 50% that buy in the next 18 months? They just burnt me.
And what is it what is it after the follow up that you're doing to stay in touch so that you can get referral work, you can get their next project, and then the other leverage point is the long game of follow up, which is if you've got a business that it's going to be around for a while, the long game of follow up is when they're in their next house.
Yeah.
Because if they maintain the same email address and the same telephone number,
Yeah.
well, 7 years, 8 years from now, it's likely they'll be in a new house. And if you can keep in contact with them, a buyer is a buyer is a buyer. And if they had a good experience with you, they're more likely to want to trust you a second time.
Yeah.
So they're the main areas that we look, and any one of those areas can cause 10, 20, 30% shifts. Probably the really big ones, the ones where I find that we get the biggest growth is simply putting a follow-up process in place, because most people are terrible at that. Presenting the quote, and probably the next one would be, depending on the business, the next one would certainly be the sales framework. I mean, the first 2 that I mentioned are very low hanging fruit. So follow up's easy. That's just a matter of going through and doing it. But most businesses have got probably 20-30% extra sales just sitting in their CRM, just by picking the phone up. It's like found money.
Yeah.
And
I think
then
you're probably being conservative.
Yeah, like there'd be way more, and then presenting the actual quote. Well, that's a really that's a great leverage point, and then the actual sales framework itself. So there's any one of those places that we can drill down and cause some pretty significant shifts. I mean, probably my favorite example of this is a guy who he came to me, and these were his exact words. He said, "I don't like selling. I really am not comfortable talking to clients." But he wasn't saying it in a belligerent way. He was saying it in like a, he was just being really upfront and kind of confessing to me that he felt like this. And he said to me, "I've grown my business to 4 million per year without really having to talk to anyone." I couldn't make this up. He said, I
Mm.
just really, it's all just really been done on email, and I've got great tradies, and people come back to us once we engage with them because my guys are really good. And I've realized that in order for me to grow, I've got to just drop that attitude, and I've got to get better at this. And to start off with, to his credit, he I taught him how to do it so he understood it, but he still remained not that comfortable with it. But he
Mm.
then got an estimator, and we trained him, and then he ended up training two other guys by simply putting them in front of the videos, because we did it all on Zoom. It all was all happening through, because I'm based in Perth and he's in Queensland.
Yeah.
And he trained another two estimators by just showing them the videos that we'd done when I trained him and his other estimator. And I caught up with him on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and he's on track to do 10 mil.
Yeah.
And that was literally 2 years ago.
Love it.
Yeah. And it's just all through just tightening up all these things that we've been talking about.
Yeah. And that's in my world anyway. That's the first step is to create that structure. So you've actually got a process where when you get the phone call, this happens,
Yeah.
then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and it needs to be measured. Like that's what we need to talk about next before we get on to the schools is how important is the measurement to know, okay, we got this many inquiries and then we had this many, what you might call a triage conversation to find out, whether they're appropriate for your business or not. Then we had this many face-to-face meetings. We had this many people agree to pay to have a quote put together, and we had this many people go ahead with it. Like, we've just got those 5 figures. How essential is it to measure that stuff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the best things that we can do is to actually set up a visual pipeline
Mm.
so that you can actually drag each opportunity. So we set the pipeline up so that it reflects the sales process that we've created, and then we can drag each opportunity from one stage to the other. So having that visual pipeline and tightening up the meeting frameworks, and because often these people don't really have, they'll tell you that they have a sales meeting, but it's not really a sales meeting. They're real. It's like a labor allocation meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, I'll sit in on them, and at the end I'll give them a critique, and I'll say, look, you called that a sales meeting, but you really only spent about 5 to 10 minutes actually talking about opportunities. The rest of it was, who's going to work on which job. And so tightening up that meeting framework and saying, okay, well, making each estimator accountable to that particular opportunity. It's like, okay, well, when did you talk to that guy last? Oh, I talked to him a week ago. Okay, so what's the next step with him? Oh, he said he'd get back to me. Okay, well, maybe you should give him a call and just see how he's going with his decision-making process. So it's having all of that in
Surprised look.
place. Pardon?
Surprised look.
Yeah, yeah.
What? Follow it up.
Yeah.
You crazy?
Yeah, well, what do I, and it's like, well, what do I say to him? Just ask him how he's going.
Yeah.
Ask him if he's got any questions, or how he's going with his decision making process. Because in the absence of that, he's probably going to engage the other person that that follows him up, or
Mm.
that offers to add some value, or that's there to ask you that's there to answer his questions.
Yeah. It's just one of those mindset shifts that need to be made. We talk about it all of the time in our conversations, is that the building that you're creating is the commodity. That's not your product. If you're a builder, your product is the quality of your customer experience. And it's really all about what they want. And then the builder goes, oh, well, they want a 2-story brick and tile, blah, de, da. No, they want support, they want protection, and they want guidance.
Yeah.
That's what they want.
Yep.
even they quite often don't. They wouldn't verbalize that. They wouldn't even think that. But that's what the emotional drivers are. That they just. Otherwise, they could just buy the materials and build the house themselves. But there's that much that they don't know, and it gets into overwhelm. So they need guidance, and then they need some support. To so they feel comfortable doing the right thing. And they also need protection from making all of the wrong decisions that they see all over a current affair and all of that sort of stuff. So just by changing that mindset, you can get them to do what you were talking about. So, and I love, just while before I forget it, because I just thought it was brilliant when you said not only measure, because that's quite often all we talk about is measure the leads to the meetings to the whatever. See the actual opportunity and physically move it from one part of the process to the next, because apart from anything else, you could also, if you could see who the opportunity was, which couple or which person that was, you can start to see patterns of the type of people that tend to go to the next step and to the next step. And so you can build your processes and procedures around attracting those people. But that's the structure. What about just looking at the clock? What are some of the basic skills that you would recommend or that you teach? If you've got them to put a structure in place, so they are, they are handling the telephone calls a certain way and handling their meetings a certain way and presenting the proposal in person, and they're following all of your advice there. What are some of the basic skills that you teach to enhance the success of the process?
Well, I think one of the most important skills is that, because we live in this world where consumers have been conditioned to get three quotes,
Yep.
and often, and I've we've mentioned this once already on our conversation, is that often as expert tradespeople, we tend to be a little bit too eager to simply do what the client tells us.
Mm. Mm.
And we forget that we are actually experts in our particular field, and the people that are buying from us are not professional buyers of our particular product or service. And so their buying criteria, depending on their level of education or experience, will tend to gravitate back to price. Because if they see no point of difference between the quote I got from Pete Smith, Dave Phillips, and Jared Brown, then they're just going to buy at the lowest possible price. So, I one of the key things. So, people who are listening to this, one of the key things is ask them why. So the first question, I want to get this done. Well, what, ask them why. So why? Firstly, why me?
Yep.
Because you need to know how you are positioned in their particular eyes, in the eyes of the actual person who is contacting you. How are you positioned? Are you positioned in line with those three other guys that they're going to be talking to? Or did they see something that you did? Did they see a particular project that you worked on that was really good? Did they have somebody that referred you? One of my favorite questions to ask is, I help people with their sales, and there's, last time I checked, there's like 180 million pages on sales training on Google. One of my favorite questions is, so out of the 180 pages on Google that talk about sales training, was there any particular reason that you decided to contact me? Right. So why me? And then the second one is why this, and why in this manner? Because that way you can get their level of understanding or education, but most importantly, you can add value and you can create what I call 3 gee, I didn't know that moments, because chances are your competitors aren't going to question what the person wants to do.
Mm.
And if you don't question what they want to do, you don't get an opportunity to add value. And a gee, I didn't know that moment is, oh wow, I didn't, well, no one else has asked me that.
Yeah.
And oh really, I need to have that in place, or I need to get that approval if I'm going to go down that path. Or oh really, I can save money on that if I do it a slightly different way. Yeah, well now you've actually added value, and you've created inequality in the way that they perceive you, as opposed to the way that they're perceiving other people that they're talking to. So if you can create 2 or 3 of those gee, I didn't know that moments, well suddenly you're actually not playing on an even playing field. You are positioned more superior to what they are. So a gee, I didn't know that could simply be a question that no one else has asked them.
Mm.
It could be a "Are you aware?" question. So, are you aware that if you actually use this type approach with this particular part of your plan, you can actually save X, or if you do this, you won't have to spend the money on this. And suddenly they're going, "Oh, gee, the 2 other guys I spoke to never mentioned that."
Mm.
And that's because often we just go out and we just, "Oh yeah, what do you want?" "Oh yeah, well, I want a deck." "Okay, well I'll just do the deck."
Yeah. Yeah.
"Oh, how big do you want the deck? Where do you want the deck?" "I want the deck over there." "Okay,
And they're
I'll
probably
put it, I'll,
thinking,
I'll
well,
put it,
that's
I'll
a
put a
stupid
quote
place to
together
put
and I'll
it in
send
their
it to you."
head.
What's that?
In their head, the builder's probably saying, well, that's a stupid place to put it, but that's what you
Yeah,
want.
yeah. Well, and questions like, so what do you want to be able to do out here? What specifically did you have in mind for this particular area?
Mm.
I've done a couple of I've had a couple of really good successes with landscape businesses, and so it's really competitive. Like there's a lot of people out there that are doing it, and it's the easiest strategic advantage to get is to create 2 or 3 of these gee, I didn't know that type moments.
And I
Um,
suspect that can be trained as well. Like that can be choreographed and trained to somebody else. If you've got the guy who you mentioned before
Absolutely,
who,
yeah,
I don't want to talk to people. Okay, well, let's put someone in there that loves talking to people and give them these questions to ask or this process to
yeah,
follow.
absolutely. And the window treatment client that I work with, one of their most successful sales girls would, someone would say, "Oh, I want to put plantation shutters in this room." She'd say, "Why?
Mm.
Why do you want to put plantation shutters in here?" "Oh, because like I want to make sure that that the sun doesn't, it's totally blacked out." She's like, "Well, are you aware that plantation shutters don't actually
Don't black
block
out.
all of the light out?" "Oh no, I didn't know that."
Yeah.
My favorite one was this email came in, and this is a classic example of engaging leads, and it was like, "Oh, here's my plans. Can you send me through a quote for shears for this particular property?" And I wrote back because we were we were actually running a 1-day strategic session with them, and they were like, how should we respond to this? And I grabbed the phone and I wrote the reply. I said, "Are you aware that shears are the most expensive window treatments that you can get?" And she wrote back this 5-paragraph. I mean, mostly people are just like, "Send me a quote," and then you send them a quote, you never hear from them again, right? And I wrote back and said, "Are you aware that shears are the most expensive window treatments that you can put in your home?" And she wrote back and said, "Oh, the only reason that we're having to put window treatments in there is it's a bank, it's a bank requirement, and I had no idea that shears were so expensive. And the only way that the bank will actually lend us the money is if we've actually got window treatments and carpet in the place. Otherwise, the mortgage insurers, and it was just this, love letter that
Mm.
she sent
Mm.
through, and it was just a classic example of, rather than just giving them what they want, because they're uneducated. She didn't know that shears were the most expensive window treatments that you can get, and there's just so many examples of ways that you can endear yourself to potential clients by adding value, just simple stuff that that's just second nature to you that most people, especially inexperienced buyers, just aren't aware of.
Mm. Yeah. Just looking at the clock on the wall reminds me of a George Thorogood and the Delaware Destroyers song, but I won't do any
Yeah.
singing in this podcast. Not that George Thorogood sings, but like there's been so much gold in this conversation. There just really has. Just the simple things that are such big levers to be able to cherry pick that low hanging fruit that it's already there. It
Yeah.
costs you nothing, just a bit of effort and a bit of thought to be able to double your profits, probably, if not more.
And I think that the this work that tradespeople do, it's physical, demanding work,
Hmm.
and why wouldn't you want to optimize the return on that exertion?
Yeah.
Because I think that that people who are on the tools, perhaps not when when you become the manager of the business, but if you're perhaps a smaller operation where you are still on the tools to some extent, it's a physical thing and you can't do it forever.
Hmm.
So while you are doing it, why wouldn't you want to optimize the return on your effort, the return on your energy, the return on your investment in staff and advertising and branding and all that?
Hmm.
And there really are so many, and that's one of the things that I love about working with trades businesses is that as opposed to, there are certain industries that I just don't go anywhere near. I sort of, turn around and run in the opposite direction. But one of the one of the things I love about working with trades and construction businesses is that there is so much upside,
Hmm.
and it really isn't that difficult to help them.
No. And it's probably the answer to the question is why wouldn't you? But the
Yeah,
answer to that question is probably very similar to the lady who wanted the quote for the expensive window dressings because they don't know. They
yeah, it's just
just don't
awareness.
know how powerful, how valuable, how much of a return you'll get on your effort when you've got a sales process and put a little bit of time into sales skills. So the real question before we bail out of here is where do they get a hold of you? Where do they find you? What are the first steps to have a conversation with you?
Well, at the moment, I'm in the process of changing my website over, so they may get they may get an under construction if they try and jump on that straight away. But the best way would be to email me,
Okay.
and I actually do reply to my emails, which is John JOHN at John JOHN hyphen Blake BLAKE.com.au, or my website, which is www.john-blake.com.au. But if any of that was hard to get because you were driving or whatever, if you just do a Google search for John Blake Sales,
Yeah.
I will pop up there
Yeah. And
pretty
we'll put it
high.
in the show notes and the description for the podcast in any case, so they'll just have
Yeah.
a link there to
And
go
like
straight to
I'm
your email.
happy to run through. I can think of at least a dozen case studies that relate to all sorts of different industries. So if anyone wants me to walk them through, what I've done for some other people, that's usually a pretty good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's I just am such a fan of making this a priority in your business, because I don't know how many conversations I've had with builders in particular that that they reach out to us and how can we help you, what's the story, and I need more leads, I need more leads, I need more leads. And after the end of that conversation, it's like, you don't need more leads, like
No.
you need a process to deal
Yeah.
with. Even if you've got a trickle of leads, having a process to deal with them is a game changer
Yeah.
versus investing time, money, and effort into lead generation, and then they just disappear in the black hole because you don't have a process. So it's just been gold. Everything
Yeah.
that you've said has been fantastic.
Awesome. Well, mate, it's always a pleasure. We've, I think our first conversation was over 10 years ago.
Yeah, we were just trying to work that out the other day, and
Yeah.
somebody, I think Julie said to me, "Is Mal Emery still alive?" And I think he is.
Yeah, I bump into him at the
Oh, there you go.
sushi train around the corner every now and then.
And it's not a ghost; it's the real Mal.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
and that must have been a long, long time ago. I think our first soiree, seeing Mal and meeting you and Lee. I think there was a one in Brighton Les Sands, a big 3-dayer or whatever in Brighton Les
Yeah, it
Sands
was.
in
It
Sydney
was.
was the first time I
In
saw it.
fact, I believe that was around about 2007.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yep. 2007,
That's
2008.
more
So,
than 10 years.
yeah, many moons. Many moons.
And we haven't aged a day.
No, not at all.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And folks, I really encourage you to reach out to John. We'll put the information in the description, and reach out. And if you need a hand with a sales process or sales skills, I'd be reaching out to John and having a conversation with him and see if he can point you in the right direction. So thanks very much, John. Appreciate you being on the Tool Shed. And
My pleasure.
folks, we'll be talking to you again in the next episode. Bye for now.